Hi everyone, welcome to the final episode of the Webflow Workout for Style Guides. And in today's video, we're going to be covering how to create an advanced style guide. So using the last version of the style guide that we worked on 2 weeks ago, we're going to add a couple more different elements and components to it and just buff it up a bit. And that should be your advanced, thorough style guide version that we're working with. So right now we have typography classes done, and then of course we have our color section complete and buttons. So in terms of what else we could add to the style guide to make it a bit more comprehensive is we could consider adding different classes for spacing elements. So if you, for example, use client first, you're probably really used to using classes like margin, top, padding, vertical, stuff of that nature. And if you're not used to using a system like that, I highly recommend it because it makes it easier to space out your content when you are creating different sections. So the next section that we'll be working with, we'll just probably call it spacing. So we're going to take our page container and we're going to take that and duplicate it. And then we're going to call this spacing. And the first type of spacing that we're going to have is, let's say, margin. So different spacing that we're going to use for our margin elements. So where it says heading 1 here, I'm just going to create a new div block and call that, let's see, I call this like margin top. Because the way in which spacing works is that you have spacing vertically, horizontally, or on a specific side. So it's also important to kind of create different div classes that apply to that. So for instance, for margin top, we're only going to affect the spacing on top, right? Same thing here if we had margin bottom. This would just be left auto, and here's where we would have our margin auto. And it doesn't have to be percentages either. You could really do anything with it. Let me go ahead and just build out all these different margin spacings. Okay, so now we have our different margin elements, orientation. So top, bottom, left, right, vertical, and horizontal. And next we're going to go in and create a couple more rows that are going to be focused on how much spacing we want to create, template spacing. So for instance, this first one I've created is margin small. So if we want to apply a small margin, and you can see here that I've set the smallest to 2%. Now, typically with spacing elements, you won't really see anything. So for instance, here you can see obviously the outline of the div box because you're an editor, but if I preview, you don't see anything. If you do want to add some styling to your spacing elements so that you can visually see them without actually applying styling to the margin, what you normally do is, if I open up my layers panel, this is your margin element or your spacing element, whatever it is, margin, padding, etc. And then you have two other containers it's working with. So there's an outward container, which can have like an outline of sorts. And then there's a container that goes inside. And this is the container that has a fill color. So whatever color it is that you want. You also need to make sure you set like a minimum, maximum height and width for it so that it actually displays accordingly. So this is a really great way to be able to actually visualize, okay, small amount of margin is like around this kind of space. And this spacer box on the inside is just meant to represent whatever element it is that you are applying spacing to. This is the amount of spacing that will be applied. So I'm just going to duplicate this and create a couple more different sizes for the margin. Okay, so we've created two more margin classes, margin medium and margin large. And like I said, you can visually see the difference in spacing taken. So if I wanted a large margin, then I would have used this class. If I wanted something much smaller, I would have used something like this. So now that we've got our margin done, we're just going to go ahead and actually first I'm going to grab these and delete them, our textiles. And I'm going to grab this style wrapper for the margin and duplicate that. And this time we are going to do the same thing, but for padding. So it's literally the same thing, same values. It's just that instead of applying them to the margin, which is this outer layer here, we're going to apply them to the padding, which is this inner layer here. So I'll just go ahead and make those changes. Okay, and our padding elements are also now complete. So we have the same values that we've applied. We're just adding them to our different padding elements. Now you might think, okay, this is enough for spacing, but we can actually add in a couple more sections for this. For instance, what other elements regarding spacing do we normally use when building a site? Probably containers, or at least I use containers a lot. If you don't, they're very helpful. So we can create like a couple simple classes to use as default for containers. And for containers, we can really keep it simple. So container small, container medium, and container large. What we're gonna do is just take our padding small element and delete that and apply our container small element. And so that will create a max width of, let's say, 50 rem. Actually, that's kind of huge. Say 35 rem. So 35 rem is the max that we're going to be using for our container. So now we've created our container elements. One thing you want to do for containers is that I usually like to set them horizontally because that's how I use containers. They're different from max width elements, which we can also create. So once we've set that up, we can just go ahead and do these other containers. So you can see here the slight difference in, space taken. So if you put something in like a container small, it would obviously only take up this much space. Whereas if it's a large container, it takes up a lot more space. So we've got containers done. And the other thing I wanted to add is max width. So sometimes, separate from containers, you want to place something in an element, but only have it extend to a certain width. So that's what max width elements are great for. And usually when I'm designing, I have like a ton of classes for these because there's always like a slight difference. Like maybe you need it to be 400 pixels versus 350 pixels versus 200 pixels. So you could have like a bunch of different classes for it. But I'm just going to create 3 for these purposes. So they're pretty similar to containers, max width small. It's just that you don't apply margin auto to them because they don't necessarily have to be centered on the page. So that's what I'm going to do for all of these. Keep the values the same, but just remove margin auto from them. And these are different max width elements. So this is our spacing section, which I think looks really good so far. But of course, I think that there's one more thing that we can add to this to make our style guide more advanced. And that is shadows. So shadows, let me just delete this. Okay, shadows are a great way if you are incorporating shadows in your design. It can help to just create a template for the kind of shadows that you want to be working with. So I'm just gonna call this shadow dash. And what I actually want to do is have it in grid format like this. Okay, so this is our shadow small, and then maybe we want our shadow medium, which can be a bit larger. So I will just increase that to 15. And then we could have our shadow large. And we can make that 20. And then let's duplicate this like 3 more times. And so these are our different shadow elements that we're working with, which is great. So for our spacing, so we have our spacing section, we have our shadow section. We could add in a section as well for forms. So if I duplicate this, if you want to create a different template for the forms that you're using in your design, you can do that as well. So let's go ahead and actually might duplicate a different container. I'll duplicate this spacing one and then move it to the end. Okay, so our form elements. So starting off with our input fields. And obviously the thing with forms is that they have to be in a form block. So the easiest thing to do might be to add in a form block and then the styling options within that form block. Okay, and now that we have established these different, so we have our form element within a larger form block, and we can go ahead and create different versions. A regular input field, text area, select, totally up to you. So we're just going to create a couple of different form elements that we might use in a typical form. Okay, and so we have our different form elements laid out, and yeah, that looks pretty good. So we've obviously added a lot more different elements to our style guide, spacing, forms, and what was the other one? Shadows. And this just gives us a couple more tools and templates to work with when we are in fact building our website. And that concludes the end of this video. Hopefully this is helpful and you have a much better understanding of how to build out your own style guide. There are a lot of great templates available as well. You can even download this one as a starting point, but it helps to kind of customize your style guide in the way that works for you when you are creating your website in Webflow. And as usual, if you have any questions, let me know. Since this is the last episode for style guides, we will be having a catch-up session. If you're interested or have any further questions, information on that will be sent via email and also will be on the Discord. Thanks again, and bye.